Good morning, everyone. My name is Ankit, and you are watching studyIQ IS English channel. And today we are going to discuss the newspapers, and we are going to analyze newspapers for 5th of December, that is today. Understood? So these are the articles that I am going to cover. There are total 7 number of them, and these are from 3 sources: The Hindu, Indian Express newspapers, as well as the PIB newspaper. This is from the Indian Express newspaper, so sorry for this mistake. Now, after the class, you can download the notes on this particular Telegram channel. The link I've provided here, as well as the QR code. You can scan the QR code and you'll go to the channel, and I'll upload the notes immediately after the session concludes. Okay. So, we begin with the first article of the day, and it appeared in the editorial section of the Hindu newspaper. And you can see this article deals with the recent cash transfer schemes that have been in news because of the elections in states such as Maharashtra, Jharkhand, and earlier this was also popular in states such as Madhya Pradesh, where Ladli Behan Yojana made a great mark for the ruling party and they came back into power. So did the ruling parties in Maharashtra as well as in Jharkhand. And all of this, according to many analysts, is because of the popular cash transfer scheme that have been provided to the women in these states. Now, you have to understand these cash transfer schemes are provided to all women in these states, not to just some section of women. Now, this news article is important from GS paper 2 syllabus, polity syllabus, because women form the vulnerable section of the society, and also any policies impact and its implementation is covered in the GS paper 2 syllabus, right? Now, as I said, Maharashtra's Majhi Ladli Behan Yojana was in news, which provided for about 1500 to 2000 rupees per month to every woman in the state, and this formed a big reason for the ruling parties coming back into power. And what are these cash transfer schemes? Now, I already told you certain amount of money is transferred directly into the bank account of beneficiaries. This is the cash transfer scheme. Now, this cash transfer is unconditional, that every women are eligible. So, there are no inclusion or exclusion errors also. Now, why are these cash transfers popular among people as well as the political parties? Now, you have to understand the changing socio-political context in the country to understand the impact of these schemes. Because earlier, back in 1960s, 70s, women's they were not used to participate so much in the country's electoral process. However, this has changed in the recent past. For instance, in the year 1962 elections, 47% of women voted across the country, less than half the total amount of women. And this changed in the year 2024. Where women formed approximately 66% of the total number of women voted in the country. So you can see female participation in country's political process has increased. So has their say in the who is going to win the election, and political parties are very cognizant of this fact. And because of this fact, we are seeing that women beneficiaries are a very important focus for political parties. They are implementing special schemes, they are giving them monetary benefits, they are giving them social security, they are giving them free transportation, especially in states such as Karnataka, even in Delhi for that matter. So that is why the first reason is the rise in the presence of women in India's political space, which is highlighted by this very fact, that female participation in the country's electoral process has increased, so much so that currently more number of women vote than compared to men. Now, the second fact why this cash transfer schemes have been so popular is that it bypasses the middleman altogether. Why? Because the benefit is transferred directly into the bank account through a process called direct benefit transfer, where your Aadhaar and mobile number is linked with bank account. Now, famously, if you could recall, back in 80s when Mr. Rajiv Gandhi was Prime Minister, he said that for every rupee that he transfers or he gives to the beneficiary only receives 15 paisa. So you can understand 85 paisa of the government's money is siphoned off by various middlemen. And this has been solved by such direct benefit transfer schemes. That is why this have been so popular for the government, that government is able to save so much more money, and using that very money, government is implementing other benefits, welfare benefits for women, be it construction of working women hospitals, industrial corridors, special buses and transports for women. And all of this are intended to benefit women in socio-economic sphere. The third reason is the immediate impact on the electorate. Now, if you could recall, if the government wants to spend some amount of money and if it constructs certain project, be it hospitals, schools, or even roads and bridges, all of these infrastructure and social projects, it takes time for it to be constructed and it to pay rich dividends to the political party. However, on the other hand, the impact of the cash transfer is immediate. As soon as the bank, the money is credited to the account, the beneficiary feels well off. So this is why, because of the immediate electoral impact also, we are seeing greater reliance of various governments on such cash transfers. Now, there's also another important fact, that many of the government services are easily or relatively better available in urban areas. Similarly, you cannot say the same in rural areas. For example, education and health services. In any district headquarters, you'll see a multi-speciality government hospital. On the other hand, in rural areas, there are just primary healthcare centers, and if you're lucky, there are community health centers as well. So this distinction between rural and urban area, in terms of availability of government infrastructure and services, it is not the case with bank transfers, because bank money transfer is unconditional. It is available to rural women, it is available to urban women also. That is why it does not, or it has a proportional impact on both rural and urban areas and not uneven impact. Correct. However, the article in today's newspaper, it also highlights that there are certain issues with this model, that this model is not a problem-free model. And why is the article saying so? First of all, it says that there are certain responsibilities in the country which is vested to the state. State, for that matter, is the Indian state, be it union government, state government, or any governmental bodies. Article 13. Right. Now, if any government, you have formed any government, it has certain responsibilities towards its citizens, such as provision of healthcare services, educational services, certain public goods also, which in a way is not provided by the private sector. So, giving people just the money and not providing them with the relatable services, it ignores the capacity of the state to provide services to its own citizens, by virtue of which state is being elected. Another one is that by ignoring the state capacity and by cash transfers, the government is nudging its own citizens towards private alternatives. Now pay close attention, although private services, the quality of these services are better than government services, but the cost incurred in these services are quite high. So even if you're sending some amount of money to beneficiaries, they are getting less amount of services per money in case of private alternatives, and this has been the case in many states which we have seen. Further is the inflationary pressures. Now it is both direct and indirect. How direct inflationary pressure? Because you're sending money into every women's bank account, so women have more disposable income to save or to spend. That is why it will be nudged into the economy, and on a broader sense, you can understand it will increase the money supply, right? Now, on another level, it is also inflationary because to provide cash transfers, the government has to borrow more money. And by borrowing more money, you can understand it also leads to increased inflation. So, such policies has both direct and indirect impact by increasing the inflationary pressures in the economy. So, this is the issue and sum total of arguments that I have presented for cash transfer schemes for women, that although they are very popular because they have many benefits, but also they have certain amount of issues which is quite serious as far as Indian political and economic context is concerned. Now, let us move to the next article, and you can see this article appeared in the text and context section of the Hindu newspaper. Now, this demand for caste census by various stakeholders in the country, prominently India's political parties, as well as some NGOs and social organizations also, have been in news for quite some time. Now, this article is important from GS paper 2 syllabus because it fundamentally deals with the issue related to reservation, which is a part of part 3 of the Indian Constitution. Now, caste census is basically an enumeration exercise of people, which has become a heated political issue. Now, this survey is like a normal census, but in this survey, the enumerators of the census ask the beneficiary their caste and their subcaste. And based on this data, the government then analyzes the data to provide for distribution of various governmental services, be it reservation for jobs or distribution of food and different grains to the people of India. So, this is a survey, as I have already highlighted, designed to collect a detailed information on caste and subcaste of individual, to which caste or subcaste do they belong, along with the other demographic and socio-economic data. So, theoretically, we can also understand people belonging to X caste is rich or people belonging to Y caste is socially or economically deprived section. So, by that logic, the government can provide benefits to Y category of caste. Understood? So, this has been the basic idea over caste census. Now, is the caste census a new idea altogether? The answer obviously is no, because the first detailed caste census occurred in the country back during the British era of 1871 and 72. However, the British colonial masters, they did not have a detailed idea about India's caste system. So, they thought caste system mirrors the Varna system. So, they categorized people into different subsects, and this did not actually meant the ground reality. So, in this regard, the British colonial government conducted another caste census in the year 1931. Learning from the mistakes of the year 1871 and 72, they actually found out that there were more than 4,100 castes in the country. So, you can understand, Varnas there are just 4. And on the other hand, British government identified more than 4,100 castes. So, you can see the disparity between these two data. Now, the recent caste census which has happened was called socio-economic caste census of the year 2011. And you know how much caste this census identified? 46.7 lakh caste or subcaste. So, see the difference. This is 4,100. This is 46.7 lakhs. And even without that, there were 8.2 crore people or entries which was acknowledged to be error prone, which means that the beneficiary or 8.2 beneficiaries, their caste cannot be adequately determined based on the available data. So, this was the scope of the last caste census that happened in India. Now, there are many challenges that you can conduct a caste census, although it is a time taking and a money spending exercise, but you will get the adequate data. But then the question remains, is the data error free, or what you will do with the data. Can you implement any scheme based on this data? Let us discuss that. Okay. Now there are certain challenges related to success of caste census. First set of challenges are related to identification of people belonging to certain caste, and there are certain challenges also in that. First is the upward caste mobility claim. Now you understand castes in India, especially people who belong to higher caste in the country, they associate their caste with prestige. Now, when people tend to associate caste with prestige, there is a fair amount of chance that a person who belongs to caste on the lower levels of hierarchy, they will claim to be someone from an upward caste. And this is the problem which the enumerators of caste census will face. Understand that the person who is telling them their caste may not be entirely true, because he or she might be afraid to tell that they belong to a lower caste category because it has less prestige. Okay. Now the second factor is the downward caste mobility claim, which is opposite of this. Now in downward caste mobility claim, here the people will tend to identify, or they will identify themselves belonging to a caste which is on a lower level of social hierarchy. And why is that prominent? Because people, especially after the India's independence, they associate caste with respect to secular benefits such as reservation policy of the government. Now people feel that if they identify with lower caste, then they will be eligible to get reservation benefits also. So this has been the reason that in many cases people might identify with lower levels of caste also. Now the third problem is related to social stigma, that is the problem of caste misclassification, because there are similar sounding caste that exists in our country and in different states. So the enumerator might misidentify certain caste, and even if he or she is unsure about what caste the beneficiary is of, there is a fair bit amount of chance that he or she will not ask the caste of the beneficiary because of the social stigma associated with it. So they try to identify caste based on other indicators such as what is their surname, what is their occupation, etc. And this has been the problem in conduction of such surveys, because there are certain data which you understand will always be error prone. Now the another set of problem is related to the implementation of such caste census. Now what is the primary demand of people when they demand for caste census is that after identifying the various percentage of people belonging to different caste, you have to provide them with proportional benefits. What do you mean by proportional benefits? That is, if a certain caste has 4% of population in the country, then that caste should be eligible to get 4% of benefits, be it jobs, be it finances, etc. So this is the proportional benefits or representation that people demand. But the Hindu's article highlights that such demand almost entirely are always impractical in nature. And let me tell you why. You can see this table right here, right? I have borrowed this table from today's article in the newspaper. Now this highlights that 2011 SECC data identified almost 46.7 lakh caste and subcaste. Now what if you were to provide each and every one of people and beneficiaries belonging to each and every caste jobs in UPSC? So you cannot do that, right? Because UPSC roughly provides only 1000 jobs in civil services every year. And on the other hand, you have people belonging to 46.7 lakh caste. So even if you are to provide one person belonging to each caste post in UPSC, then you can only provide jobs to 1000 caste, right? So what if the different castes are excluded? So the article says that hypothetically, if you are to provide jobs in UPSC to one person belonging to every caste in India, you will be needing almost 46 or 4,673 years to fulfill this demand of proportional representation in jobs and services. So you understand, this is quite impractical in nature. So this article is a very good article. First of all, it provides historical background and it also enumerates number of challenges that the policymakers will face in conduction and after implementation of the caste survey. Now there is a practice question also which I have curated. You can attempt this question after the session ends, and this question is mirrored on the previous year questions of UPSC. I will provide this question in the notes which I will upload on the Telegram later. So we will move to another article of the day, and this appeared in the explained section of the Indian Express. Now if you could recall, recently there was this global event which happened in Busan city of South Korea, and this global event was related to finalizing a legal binding treaty to control plastic pollution. Now this article highlights that the global plastic treaty talks have collapsed for some reason, and we will understand this reason in our today's discussion. Now this topic, that is environmental pollution, is related to environment section in GS paper 3. Now we understand in recent times plastic pollution has evolved as a big menace to our earth, that is our native planet, and the article says that annually about 430 million tons of plastic is produced, and 2/3 of this plastic produce ends up as a waste every year. So this is the number of plastic waste generated every year, that is 2/3 of 430 million tons. Now you can say, even if we generate large amount of plastic pollution, we can always recycle this to reduce the amount of pollution, right? Theoretically it is correct, but in practice only 10% of the plastic ever produced has been recycled. So theoretically you are only recycling 43 million tons worth of plastic every year, and rest of them ends up in atmosphere in one form or the other, prominently as a source of pollution. Now there are 11 million tons of plastic which are currently entering the ocean annually, and this creates certain problems, especially for the marine animals which many people consume, such as fish and prawns. Now this plastics, when they leach into ocean, they have a propensity to also pollute the local environment, which is harmful to the health of marine organisms and their fauna. Further, 46% of plastic waste is disposed of in form of landfilling or is incinerated, that is 17% of this is incinerated. And you can understand disposal of plastics in such a manner is harmful not just for water but also in terms of soil pollution as well as air pollution. Because this plastic components, they have harmful compounds like peroxides and hydroxides, which eventually will leach into atmosphere and then they will enter into our food chain and food cycle also. Further, 20 million tons of plastics, they litter up in the environment every year, which is again harmful for animals which have a propensity to consume this plastics unwillingly or involuntarily, and this has been the source of problem. So to deal with this problem, the UN Environment Program, abbreviated as UNEP, agreed that in the year 2022 they will sit together for many iterations of meeting and they will finalize a legally binding treaty by the year 2024. And since then, this meeting has happened 5 times. However, even in the 5th meeting which concluded recently, there was no legally binding agreement on how to control the plastic pollution. So this has been the context of our today's discussion, that it ended in a failure because it was unable to adopt a finally legal binding treaties, because the countries, they were unable to reach to a conclusive agreement. Now, why did the talks fail? Like every debate, there were also 2 sides in this talk. The first side, it was represented by somewhat more developed countries, such as countries belonging to European Union, Latin America, as well as some African nations also. Now, these countries were of the opinion that they were demanding for production capping of many primary polymers which are responsible for manufacturing of plastics. And they wanted a clear language that we need to eliminate certain plastic chemicals and products which have a propensity to pollute our very planet. Now, there was another side of the discussion also, which belonged primarily or which was represented primarily by a like-minded coalition of countries who are major producers of oil and crude oil. These are countries belonging to Middle East, such as Saudi Arabia, Iran, UAE. So, these countries were opposing the main demand of developed countries for capping of production goals. And they opposed this demand on grounds that it went beyond the mandate of the treaty, that the production cost or stopping the production of plastic chemicals, they were beyond the mandate of the treaty. Now, you will ask, what was the India stand? You can understand India is a developing country and it has a significant obligation towards its citizens to provide them with adequate economic and social development. So, India focused instead on right to development, which means India wants to develop its economy but not at the cost of pollution. So, India highlighted that India is a developing country and other developing countries also, in order to control the plastic pollution, they need both technical and financial assistance from developed countries. Now, this technical and financial assistance in India's demand, it also mirrors India's negotiations in climate change forum. There also India agrees to the fact that there is a climate change because of previous greenhouse gas intensive developments. However, India also needs to develop further. So, in that regard, India would need technical and financial assistance from well-off nations. And this has been the India stand even in global plastic treaty also. Now, India is also of the opinion that primary polymers which are used to manufacture plastic, they are not directly linked with the plastic pollution. Rather, the focus of countries should be on just reducing the plastic pollution, not controlling the origin of plastic, that are polymers. Now, there is also a sound economic argument in India's negotiation terms. Why? Because India of late has become a major producer of polymers as well as petroleum products, which it imports to many Western nations also. So, India would want its economic development, especially the refining sector. And that is why India's stance has favored more towards development as well as sustainable development, provided the developed countries give India technical and financial assistance. Right. So, we move to another article again, which appeared in the explained section of Indian Express, and this article is related to India's withdrawal of windfall tax on oil products. Now, this is important from GS paper 3 syllabus because it deals with government's ability to generate revenue, which is a part of government budgeting mentioned in GS 3 paper. Now, to understand windfall tax, we have to go back few years in time. This was the time when Russia was engaged in a war with Ukraine. Now, you'll say Russia is even currently engaged in war with Ukraine. But the prices of crude oil, it rose phenomenally when the war broke out. And as a result, global crude oil prices as well as Indian manufactured crude oil prices, their prices increased. Now, because of increased prices in crude oil, what we saw, there was increased fuel inflation across the world. Now, this is the premise when India introduced windfall tax. Now, windfall tax is imposed on companies when they make a huge amount of profit, but this profit is not a regular profit. Why? Because companies are managing to get this profit because of some special circumstances, which back then was the Russia-Ukraine war. Now I told you, right, the prices of fuel products increased phenomenally across many markets. However, Indian government, it tried to control the prices of fuel beyond a certain limit by reducing its own excise duty which it imposes on petroleum products. However, prices of petroleum products were more in other international markets also, or in other countries. So this promoted or prompted major refiners in our country, especially the private refiners, to export their petroleum products to other markets rather than selling them into India. Now, to discourage this practice and to ensure enough fuel supply to meet domestic demand, the government imposed a windfall tax. Now, what is this windfall tax? Now, this are a form of cess which is under the ambit of Indian government central excise policy. Now, it is imposed on fuel exports as well as domestic production of crude oil, and this is intended to tax the supernormal profits that the companies were generating back then by selling their products into other international markets. So government wanted to tax their profits and wanted also to nudge them to sell their produce rather in the domestic market, and this has been the reason for imposition of windfall tax. That is, it was taking a share of windfall profit which then the government was channelizing into cross-subsidizing the prices of fuel for Indian consumers in the market. And it also ensured that there was this enough fuel supply in the Indian economy so as to keep India running. Now you'll ask why the government has now removed the windfall tax. What is the impact of the move? Now, originally, when this windfall tax was introduced, many oil manufacturing companies, they opposed this decision by the government. They felt that another set of taxation which was imposed created a tax uncertainty in the business and also reduced the what you called ease of doing business in the country. So, understanding the concerns of the refining sector, which is a big contributors to India's GDP, the government, it introduced or it removed the windfall gains tax that it imposed so as to ensure the companies now have higher profitability, which is both fair and just. Also, the government, it wants to promote efforts to increase India's domestic oil production, because for our crude oil demands, 85% of India's crude oil demand are met by imports. So, to reduce this dependence on imports, the government wants the companies to promote domestic production of crude oil. So, this was the entire logic why the government has withdrawn windfall tax. Now, we will implement our knowledge today that we have gained with the practice question. Now, which one of the following best describes windfall tax often talked about in the media recently with reference to India? Now, there are 4 statements in the question, and you are to analyze how many amount of which statement here is correct. Now, is it a tax that unlisted companies are liable to pay the capital when they issue shares? No, it is not. Is it a tax paying mechanism offered to small businesses? No. Is it a tax on online advertisement services offered by non-resident entities? No. This was acquisition levy. This was a GST composition scheme. This is angel tax. So, the correct answer here is D, that is, it is a higher tax levied by the government against certain industries which experience above average profit, and these oil companies were experiencing above average profit due to increase in crude oil prices due to Russia-Ukraine war. Understood? Now, we move to another article which appeared in the business page of Indian Express newspaper, and it is important from GS3 part of the syllabus. Now this question asks, will the Reserve Bank go for a cash reserve ratio cut? Now why will RBI go for such cash reserve ratio cut? Now you have to understand, India witnessed a low economic growth which was just 5.8% in the last quarter of this financial year. Now the primary reason of this low growth was the high cost of credit which is available in the Indian economy. Now why is credit available at a high cost in India? Because RBI has not reduced its repo rate in many times because of inflation in the country. Now the primary responsibility, which you may already know, of RBI is to control inflation levels in the country, and it does so by increasing or decreasing the money supply in the country. By increasing the money supply, the government or the RBI reduces inflation, and the opposite or vice versa is also true, that by reducing the money supply or increasing the money supply, it will reduce the cost of credit. Now, what is cash reserve ratio in this regard? Now you can understand cash reserve ratio is also a quantitative tool that RBI uses to control the money supply. Now this money supply also correlates to inflation, which I have already told you. So cash reserve ratio by its definition is a percentage of bank's total deposit that the bank is required to maintain in liquid cash with the RBI as a reserve. For example, currently the cash reserve ratio is 4.5%, which means for every 100 rupee deposit, the banks have to deposit rupees 4.5 with the RBI in form of cash. Understood? And on this deposit, bank is not liable to get any interest. Now this provision is made according to RBI Act of the year 1934. It is quite similar to statutory liquidity ratio. The statutory liquidity ratio, on the other hand, is maintained by the bank themselves, and it is according to Banking Regulation Act of the year 1949. Now, why the RBI is looking to cut the cash reserve ratio? Now, there are many reasons to it. First is the India's banking system is currently facing liquidity shortage. And why is this liquidity shortage in India's banking system? Because you may have heard the news, India's rupee has depreciated a lot with respect to dollars. And why this happens? Because in India's case, the money supply of rupee is quite high when you compare to inflow of dollars in the country. And also, whenever the foreign institutional investors, they were taking the money out of India, it also led to shortage of dollars in Indian economy. So to compensate for the shortage of dollars, what RBI did is that it supplied dollars in the economy and took out rupees from the money supply, which ultimately led to crunch of liquidity in India's banking system. So to have or enable banks have sufficient liquidity, the RBI is looking to cut the cash reserve ratio. For example, earlier bank was keeping 4.5 rupees for every 100 rupees as a reserve. Now if the RBI reduces this 4.5 to say 4%, then the only reserve the banks will need is 4 rupees, and it will set free 50 paisa over every 100 rupee in the economy, which will result into increase in money supply. Another factor that the bank RBI is considering is that it will the liquidity in banking system will further tighten in December because of outflow related to payment of advance tax, which is due for many sections of population, goods and services tax payment, as well as quarter end demand for credit, which is fulfilled by the banks. Now, what will be the impact of such a move by RBI? That what the RBI wants to do? The answer to this is that by reducing the CRR, RBI wants to make additional funds available to India's banking system also. Now, whenever there is a surplus liquidity in the banking system, it will also enable the banks to lend more and more to different sections of people, which will again promote a country's economic growth. So you understand the reason for RBI to reduce the cash reserve ratio ultimately is to increase this level of economic growth, which was quite low in the last quarter of this financial year. Now, let us now solve the practice question. Now, this question, consider the following statements regard to cash reserve ratio. The CRR is a percentage of bank's total deposit that must be maintained as reserves with the banks themselves. Now, pay close attention to the wordings of this statement. I have said that the CRR is a percentage of bank's total deposit. This part of the statement is correct. That must be maintained as reserves, again correct. But are this CRR reserves maintained with bank themselves? The answer is no, because they are maintained instead with the RBI itself. It is the reserves under statutory liquidity ratio which are maintained by the banks themselves and not the CRR. The second statement, an increase in CRR will lead to an increase in liquidity available in the banking system. Now, this statement again is incorrect, because if I increase the CRR, which means banks will have to keep more money aside as reserves, which will also mean that banks will be left out with less amount of cash to lend people. So, this will again, that is, increase in CRR will lead to reduction in liquidity and not increase in liquidity. So, as both of the statements are incorrect, that is why option D is the right answer to this practice question. Now, moving to two sets of articles that appeared in the PIB yesterday. The first was a parliament question which was asked to the Minister of Science and Technology regarding why is the launch of NISAR satellite delayed. Now, NISAR satellite is a satellite made by NASA, a collaboration between NASA and ISRO, as NASA is supplying some parts and some parts are supplied by ISRO, and the launch duties or the responsibility of this NISAR satellite belongs to ISRO. That ISRO will launch this satellite on its own launch vehicle. Now, the Minister of Science and Technology has informed the Parliament that there was certain reintegration needs that needed to be happen, and that is why the satellite was initially brought to India but was taken back to USA for its rectification, and this has caused a delay, and because of this delay the now launch is planned in March of the year 2025. Now, you will ask, what is this NISAR satellite and why you need two space agencies to collaborate on such satellite? Now, the reason for this collaboration is the cutting edge research and tools that the satellite is using, which is enabling it to have a proper and significant amount of remote sensing in the society. Now, NISAR is a short form for NASA ISRO synthetic aperture radar, as it is a earth sensing satellite or particularly a radar imaging satellite which uses dual frequency synthetic aperture radar. Now, it is jointly developed by ISRO and NASA, and it will be placed in low earth observatory or in a trajectory, and it will be placed in a sun synchronous orbit. Why you need sun synchronous orbit? Because this is a remote sensing satellite, and by sun synchronizing the orbit of the satellite, you mean that at a particular place on earth, this satellite will appear at a one particular time every day. So, suppose this satellite is analyzing the areas of Delhi, so it will appear in Delhi every day at a fixed amount of time, say 2 p.m. So, it can assess the changes in the demography or the topography of Delhi at a certain time over a period of many months and years. Understood. Now, this satellite is primarily aimed to observe Earth's land and ice surface twice every 12 days. Now, the components of these satellites, that is L band is provided by the NASA. It has a lower frequency, that is of 1 to 2 gigahertz, and this lower frequency of L-band SAR radar will enable the satellite to penetrate vegetation cover as well as soil cover in the country. So because of this quality, the L-band SAR of the satellite will be able to assess soil moisture as well as other qualities of soil and vegetation density also. Further, the ISRO, it is supplying the satellite with a S-band synthetic aperture radar which has a higher frequency compared to L-band, that is frequencies between 2 to 4 gigahertz. Now this S-band SAR will be used for high resolution applications, especially understanding the changes in urban and coastal areas. For example, due to many environmental disasters or global warming, we see the coastal areas are witnessing a inflow of water, that is seawater levels. Further, there are changes in urban areas that we are witnessing, that is less and less water bodies and more constructed and concrete filled areas, which is again detrimental to our local and urban environments. So this is what this satellite intends to do, that is it will intend to penetrate vegetation and soil cover to assess soil moisture and other monitoring parameters, and also the higher frequency S-band radar will enable it to understand or assess the changes in urban and coastal areas. Now, what is the significance of such development? First of all, as I already said, the world is witnessing global warming and there will be certain physiographic changes because of global warming. And this satellite will be in a pole position to study the changes in Earth's ice and land surfaces. It will also assess the warning signs of natural disasters such as landslide, tsunami, etc. And also it will measure the groundwater levels, which is very crucial for a developing countries like India. Because as we have seen in states, northern states such as Punjab, Haryana, western part of Uttar Pradesh, these areas witness water intensive cultivation of paddy and rice. Now, although they are able to cultivate because of good levels of irrigation, however, it has led to reduction in their groundwater levels, and because of this there is a certain dangers that this area will be water stressed in the coming decades. So such satellites will be able to assess the reduction in groundwater levels and will enable the policy makers to take steps to stop the decline of groundwater levels. Now this is the photograph of the NISAR which I have taken from the NASA's website, and now we can solve another practice question which is on NISAR satellite. Now the first statement, NISAR is a joint Earth observation mission developed by NASA and ISRO. It is a correct statement. Second statement, the satellite primarily uses L-band and S-band synthetic aperture radar for data collection. Again correct. L-band SAR was supplied by NASA as well as S-band was supplied by our very own space research organization, that is ISRO. Now the third statement, NISAR's primary focus is on astronomical studies beyond Earth's atmosphere. Now you remember this is a remote sensing satellite which is intended to observe Earth's surface and not the outer atmosphere. So this is incorrect statement. So which of the above statement is or are correct? The correct option here is option A, because first and second statement was correct, right? So we move to the last article of the day which also appeared in PIB yesterday, and this is related to a Ministry of Consumer Affairs Development, that it is developing a national legal metrology portal called eMAP. Now do not confuse the word metrology with another similar sounding word, that is meteorology. Now meteorology is related to changes in weather pattern, whereas this metrology is related to weights and its related signs. That is, you buy any commodity, right? It has a certain weight which is inscribed there, that it weighs 1 kilogram, 2 kilograms, right? And this is the Department of Metrology's work. Understood? So not to be confused with metrology. Now, as I have already told you, metrology is related to assessment of weight and other uh, qualities of a product, and in this regard, EMAP will play a key role. How? Because the union government with EMAP intend to centralize and integrate the operation of state legal metrology departments. Now, the nodal ministry is Ministry of Consumer Affairs, Food and Public Distribution. But you will ask me, what was the need of bringing another portal? We have so many portals, right? But in this case, the government is bringing this portal because currently, if you operate a business and if you want to sell your products in different states, then you have to register your product individually on individual portals belonging to state government. So, if you are selling products in India and in every state of the country, so you will be registering yourselves in 28 different portals of different states. That is why we need one portal, one nation, right? So, this is what EMAP will do, that it will consolidate the registration of every metrology department into one single portal called EMAP. Also, previously or currently, the state governments, they operate individual portals for registering of packed commodities, issuing license, verifying their weighing instruments. However, the enforcement activities and compounding of offences, they remain offline. So, Digital India has happened in state governments, but not entirely. And because of this, they operate on an offline plus online hybrid mode. So, the government with EMAP is looking to bring whole process, that is registry, certification as well as implementation and enforcement completely online with EMAP portal. So, let us understand what are the benefits of such measure. Now, government will have a seamless online system for all aspects of legal metrology, which will include enforcement, registration of stakeholders, verification of their weighing instruments, and it will also enable government have a centralized database for all stakeholders, which the government can use for enhanced coordination between one state and another state, and also it will enable government to have data which will make it a data driven enterprise. Further, for businesses, it will minimize the compliance burden, expedite the procedures for certification and verification. Hence, you can say it will not just promote efficiency, but also will promote ease of doing business by reducing paperwork and having a centralized system throughout the country. For consumers, the weighing scale and measuring instrument will be verified by a national entity. Hence, it will be more accurate, which will help consumers boosting trust in transactions with relation to businesses. That is why it will provide people with greater awareness of their consumer rights. So, this was the EMAP portal, and we will solve another practice question. What is or are the advantages of implementing a national legal metrology portal, EMAP? The first statement, it provides a seamless online system for all aspects of legal metrology. Now, usually students, when they witness an absolute statement that all or every, they have a tendency to mark any statement incorrect. But this is not the case here, because this statement here is correct, because I have highlighted here, it is a seamless online system for all aspects of legal metrology, be it registering the stakeholders, issuing them licenses, providing them with verification certificates, as well as enforcement and compounding of offences. All of them by EMAP will be brought online. And the second statement here is the stakeholders will benefit from reduced paperwork and accurate weighing and measuring instruments, which again is correct, because businesses will have lesser compliance burden, whereas people will have an accurate weighing and measuring instrument, which will increase their trust on Indian businesses. So, as both of these statements here is correct, that is why option C is the right answer to this practice question. Understood? So, with this, I will conclude our today's session of daily newspaper analysis by StudyIQ, and I will make sure to make the notes available on this Telegram channel, the QR for which has been provided here. So I'll see you again tomorrow at 10 a.m. sharp. Until then, a very goodbye.